Hello and welcome to the Wildlife Moto channel. So there is no script for this video. We're completely freewheeling here. I just thought I'd open the mic and have a little bit of a chat with you guys about my analysis and assessment on what's been an interesting couple of weeks for Royal Enfield as they announced their new bullet for 2024. If you ask me, and I think if you ask a lot of potential customers of this bike, it turned out to be a little bit of a mess, a little bit of a case study in how not to launch a motorcycle. So I wanted to dig into that a little bit in this video and also just have a little bit of a reflection on what we're actually going to be getting from Royal Enfield in the form of the new bullets. And we can also talk about the bike we're not getting as well, because that's also quite an important factor. So on the whole launch then, what we got was a bit of a weird one, I think, from Royal Enfield, to be completely honest. Now, Royal Enfield is one of the biggest and oldest and, in many regards, most respected motorcycle brands out there today. They are heavy hitters. And rightly so. They've been on an absolute roll recently, really kind of changing the game with the motorcycle business, appealing to a whole new, younger range of potential riders, whilst also launching bikes like the Royal Enfield Interceptor, which have gone on to become some of the best-selling motorcycles, not only in its domestic market, India, but around the world. So when Royal Enfield comes out and says, we've got some news about our flagship product, the big one, the Bullet, the motorcycle world stops and pays attention, and I think rightly so. Now, what normally happens on these big launches is that the established press, the media, and some of the big YouTube channels get a bit of a heads up on the launch. So you tend to get a press release and some images and some material. Sometimes you even get to see the bike and all that kind of stuff. And you get that kind of heads up under the premise of being under what's called an embargo. So it's basically an agreement not to spill the beans before the official announcement is made, and then everybody can launch their stories at the same time with their own unique perspective and their own unique take on it. So that kind of agreement works really well because the media's got all the information that it needs. They don't need to make speculative guesses up front. Everybody knows what's happening. Everybody's got their content written out, and then they can publish it on the agreed date and time. It would appear that this didn't really happen with the launch of the bullets, and you can see that this didn't happen if you look at some of the coverage from the biggest publications out there in motorcycling, at least here in the UK. You've got magazines like MCN who got it completely wrong. They had a pot shot at guessing at what was behind some of the marketing material on the official Royal Enfield website, and completely miscalled it. And to be completely honest, I'm not blaming them. It kind of makes sense. I think I would have done the same. In fact, I did upload a YouTube short speculating inaccurately on what I'd seen as well. So what we all got to see, the public and the press at the same time, was this rolling carousel on the Royal Enfield website, which showed a bunch of graphics pertaining to what looked like a whole new range of Bullet motorcycles. So we saw a Bullet 500 logo go up on screen. We also saw a Bullet 350, a Bullet Electra, a Bullet E, and also a Bullet 65. So 5 different models all put up on screen in this carousel with this countdown. So everybody got very excited and came to the conclusion that Royal Enfield was about to announce this whole new range of Bullet motorcycles. Really exciting stuff, with one of the most salivating prospects in the whole equation being the potential re-release of the air-cooled single-cylinder Thumper last seen in the classic 500. Could it be that the Bullet 500 is back? That was the expectation that a lot of people had, having seen that Bullet 500 logo go up on screen. So you can imagine the resounding disappointment and surprise when Royal Enfield officially came out and gave us a 350 version of the Bullet and that's it. And the disappointment didn't really stop there. So not only did we not get what we thought we were getting, but what we actually got also was a bit disappointing as well, to be completely honest. You see, we already have the classic 350 from Royal Enfield. It's a brilliant little bike. It runs the J series, lean burn, single cylinder, air-cooled 350 engine, lovely chassis, beautiful design, all good. So when the Bullet 350 got announced, it was pretty much exactly the same bike, bar a slightly different seat and a couple of very small design nuances, different branding, slightly different mudguard, and a couple of different side panels. But really, for all intents and purposes, it was kind of 99% exactly the same as the classic 350. Now, don't forget, the Bullet to Royal Enfield is kind of like the iPhone to Apple. It's the absolute jewel in the crown. It is the flagship product. And to see it kind of treated this way, I think has surprised quite a few fans of the brand, to be completely honest. It hasn't gone down particularly well. And certainly in the comment section on the videos that I've uploaded, because I've uploaded a couple of videos on this, it seems that yes, there is resounding disappointment about what we actually got with the new Bullets. How hard would it have been for a big company like Royal Enfield to give us some proper redesign in this? You don't necessarily have to change things like the frame and the engine, but just do a little bit more to make it feel like a different bike. Surely it deserves that much. We didn't get it. But I think the other really big gasp of disappointment was the hole in the lineup and the missing air-cooled 500cc version of the bike. Now, if it wasn't for the fact that that 500 logo went up, I'm pretty sure nobody would be talking about this, because I think the expectation for this bike coming back was pretty wild to start with, to be completely honest. We all know what happened to it in 2020. It was knocked out of production, not necessarily because of a decision made by Royal Enfield, but also because this bike was doomed to fail Euro 5 compliance. Getting these big 500cc thumpers through Euro 5 regs is a little bit of a technical challenge. Loads and loads of stuff you can talk about on why that is, but there's a couple of issues with the single cylinder bikes. They're not particularly efficient. You've got one bang in which you've got to burn all of that fuel in your cylinder. And what tends to happen is quite a lot of excess fuel gets booted out of the exhaust into the tailpipe in the form of unburnt hydrocarbons, which is very bad for emissions. Then if you want to stay air-cooled, you've got to be incredibly careful with your fuel mixture. If you go too lean, you reduce that cooling effect that you get by having an excess of fuel in your cylinder, so you don't have that kind of evaporative effect as extra fuel gets splashed against the cylinder walls and evaporates and carries away some of that heat. So inevitably a leaner mix does equal more heat. I know it's debatable and people talk about it in terms of whether it really does, but let's say it this way: not being rich makes your bike run hotter. And when you've got an air-cooled unit, that's a bit of a problem, because you've got issues with the fact that air-cooled engines don't tend to heat up in a uniform way. They get these hot spots. So you've got to be very, very careful with your temperature control. You need them to be able to run a little bit richer to keep things cool. And without adding things like liquid cooling, you run into some issues there as soon as you start to go a little bit leaner. Because the very act of going leaner, by that we mean pushing beyond stoichiometric and into the lean zone, starts to create some of its own problems as well. We start to hit peak nitrogen oxide up there in that lean zone. So that's another one of those emissions that's measured at the tailpipe, which can cause problems for Euro 5 regulations. So engineers are constantly balancing that equation between pushing for richer and cooler, but potentially with more unburnt hydrocarbons, or leaner and hotter, with the potential to put out more nitrogen oxide. And then, of course, you've got temperature in general in that whole equation as well. So it's a bit of a nightmare, very, very complicated. It's something for very clever people to worry about. Anyway, I'm going down a rabbit hole I don't want to go down. So what I can say is, if you look at some of the, working solutions to this problem on the market today, let's look at the other one. The one that made it to market, the big Thumper that we see in BSA's Gold Star. we can see clear as day that the solution to A, getting any kind of level of performance out of that bike, and B, making it compliant for emissions, was to introduce liquid cooling. And it may well be that Royal Enfield took a look at this and thought, well, yeah, maybe we could put a liquid cooler on the bike and that might help us out. But we're talking new engine design here. We're talking about going right back to the drawing board and completely redesigning that 500cc Thumper, potentially with some kind of cooling solution in it, potentially with all of the other stuff that you'd need for Euro 5 regulations, such as onboard monitoring, anti-tamper devices and all that kind of stuff, new software. You know, it would have potentially cost millions and millions of pounds to do it. And then you have to factor in all of the commercial problems with that particular engine as well. And the reality is that it was never really a massive seller for Royal Enfield in the first place. It kind of sits in a little bit of a odd spot in the range, to be completely honest. I mean, here in the Western markets, and I'm speaking incredibly high level here, but the mass customer base tends to lean towards more performance-focused machines. Back home in the domestic markets, it's more about lightweight, simple, practical, affordable, all that kind of stuff. And the 350 does a great job in serving that market. So the 500's always been a little bit of a niche one. And I suppose the question is, did Royal Enfield really consider potentially investing millions and millions of pounds in getting that engine through prototyping, through type approvals and into production, when it might turn out to actually have a fairly short commercial shelf life anyway, considering the entire world is in the process of actually moving away from petrol. I mean, we're not that far away from our electric future. Like it or loathe it, it's one of those things that inevitably is happening. So a lot of that R&D money, a lot of that capital that they have at their disposal to invest in new technology in the bikes of tomorrow is inevitably going into A, bikes that they know damn well are going to sell, and B, into electrification. And we've already seen Ica Group, the company behind Royal Enfield, investing heavily. I think they put about 50 million euros into a Spanish company called Stark Future, which is really a case of them setting their stall out for their electric future. That gets them access to a whole bunch of EV tech that they can now start thinking about how they're going to implement into their bikes of tomorrow. So the appetite to start investing in new niche bikes is probably going to be fairly limited. And also, don't forget, Royal Enfield has another solution that they could potentially use in a faster bullet in the form of the absolute peach, that is the 650 Twin. An absolutely fantastic engine. It sits in my Royal Enfield Interceptor, also in the Continental GT, and I believe the Super Meteor as well. Parallel twin, air and oil cooled, puts out around 47 horsepower, I think something like that. Nobody's really counting on these bikes, but it is a wonderful thing. Now, of course, there are people out there who would scream absolute sacrilege at the idea of putting a twin in a bullet, but do bear in mind that it's only a matter of time before you essentially have a washing machine engine powering your bullet. It may turn out that actually the prospect of putting a twin in there in the interim actually isn't that bad. And if that gets us a faster, classic looking bullet, I think it may well be probably a better seller than a very vibey single cylinder Thumper. Now, I know some people like that, but a lot of people, if you want to push on one of those 500 Thumpers, they do get pretty shaky. So they're not going to be for everyone. They are a pretty niche thing. And it may turn out that that 650 Twin is actually a better solution for a faster bullet. So we don't know if that's going to be the case. Royal Enfield certainly haven't come out and said that they are going to put the 650 Twin inside a bullet, although I do believe there's been some spy shots that show something along the lines of that engine in something that looks like a bullet. So we'd have to see. But I'm also imagining they'd have to make some changes to the frame as well. I don't know how significant those changes would have to be, but I'm pretty sure they would have to make some structural changes there to accommodate that engine. So that's where it's all going. As I said, a little bit of a misstep, I think, from Royal Enfield in terms of how they handled this launch. They didn't do it by the book. They didn't brief the press properly. They kind of teased us in a bit of a weird way. They could probably turn around and say, oh, well, look, all we were trying to do was just have this little bit of a celebration for all things Bullet by showing some of the legacy models. That was never about teasing what was coming. Totally understand that. I think that's totally reasonable to say. But the reality is that you kind of mismanage people's expectations. And then when you don't give people what they're expecting, they get a little bit angry at you. And that's kind of what's happened. But it is what it is, as they say. There are other things in life to worry about. So the question will be now, how successful is the Bullet going to be in its current form? I think my big concern for Royal Enfield is because we've had the Classic 350 on sale here in the UK for quite a few months now. Is it a year? It's been around for a while, hasn't it? So it's quite likely that they've kind of hit some kind of saturation point for the types of customers that might want to buy that particular type of bike. I don't think people who already own the Classic 350 are going to necessarily jump out and buy a Bullet as well. It's just too similar. So the question is there enough remnant customer who didn't buy the Classic 350 who are now prepared to put their hands in their pocket for a Bullet? My thinking along those lines is that actually they may well have already peaked out with the Classic 350, and actually the Bullet's going to find itself without a significant customer base. We'll see. I'm sure it would be an absolutely cracking success out in India, where the Bullet brand continues to carry an absolute cult status. So the branding alone may well be enough in its domestic markets to drive up significant sales. The question will be, is it going to be the international seller that Royal Enfield wants it to be in the rest of the world? We will have to wait and see. And of course, we can also say that at this point, we are entirely speculating on what Royal Enfield might actually have in stock for us. It could well be that there are a whole range of Bullets somewhere ready to get announced. I would literally eat my hat if that happened. And I know I just said that on YouTube, but yeah, you can hold me to that. I can't see that 500 coming out anytime soon. Also, just before I go, I want to say a massive thank you to subscribers of the Wildlife Moto channel, because over the last couple of weeks, the channel ticked over to its 20,000 subscriber mark. Now, I know it's still a relatively small channel, but it is amazing to see how things have grown, despite the fact that I'm really not creating all that much content at the moment. I would love to be able to create more, and the more this channel grows, the more momentum I can put behind it and the more time I can put into it. At the moment, it's very much something I get to do on evenings and weekends as and when I can, and I really do enjoy doing it. So every single one of you who has hit that subscribe button, thank you so much. You are a massive part of the motivation that keeps this channel going. And if you haven't subscribed, I would hugely appreciate it if you do so, because as I said, it helps more people find the channel, it helps the channel get noticed, and it definitely puts the wind in my sails in terms of putting the energy into creating more video content. It's something I hugely enjoy doing. It's just finding the time to do more of it, which hopefully I will continue to do. Anyway, that's it for now. I hope this has been helpful just in terms of having a bit of a chit chat about my take on what's been going on with Royal Enfield recently. If you agree or disagree, stick a comment down below. And until the next one, ride safe.